Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show with my amazing guest today, Kate Engler. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a great time to have you, Kate, because the topic that we are going to delve in today is the division of labor in the house. We're not just talking about cleaning, but who's doing all the driving of the kids around? Who's doing the gardening? Who's doing the weeding? Who's taking the trash? Who's doing all the appointments? Who's taking the stuff with the doctor and all the bills? And who's taking care of your accountancy? I mean, we got problems here, and this can cause a lot of resentment in the family, even if you are passionately in love with your partner, husband, or wife. So, today I asked Kate to talk to me about this because it could be feeling quite unfair. And as a licensed couple therapist, Kate is the person. Let's talk about the issue. Let's go straight in so we can help you to create the life you want by having a cleaner, tidier house with more appointments sorted out and less stress. You talk to us about the issue now.
Wonderful. Yes, this is something that I hear about in my office all the time. It comes up regularly. And what I hear mostly, and this is mostly from heterosexual couples, it crosses all lines, but most consistently, I think because of some built-in gender norms that women report to me regularly, feeling very frustrated, resentful, annoyed, irritated, name it, about the fact that they are really responsible for and handling the bulk of what we called household labor. And I think what's important to note, you touched on a little bit, Franz, is that it's not just the doing, right? Like a lot of these women will say, my husband's a good helper. If I ask, they'll do it. But what I think we've started to come to understand, really only in probably the last, I don't know, 10 years, it's really kind of come into the cultural conversation is there's more to that. And any of us who do those things know it's not just about taking the trash out. It's about knowing that it goes out on Thursday and that the cans have to be at the end of the driveway or in your alley. It's about that Johnny and Susie both are due for their physicals at the doctor in June, and you need to set those up 3 months
Yeah.
in advance because the doctor's always busy. These are the little details and that's the part that I think that has gone unnoticed and not as discussed. And that's where we know the real frustration and resentment show up. We also know that it causes a lot of mental health struggles for the people who are holding it all because it's a lot to carry. It's the mental load, right? None of that stuff leaves your list that's constantly going around in your head of all the things that need to get done. Um, and that weighs on people. And research after research after research consistently shows that even today in 2025, it is still women carrying the bulk of those loads. So it causes a lot of issues in relationships. It's probably
Mm.
one of the biggest issues in relationships, I would say, that I see.
Yes, the bickering. Why haven't you done this? I remember one of my friends, and if she hear this episode will remember, she would say to the husband, the bin is taken out. Of course, yes, yes, darling. And then nothing happens, and after 3, 4 hours, she's like, what I meant is the bin needs taken out now,
Mhm.
not in few hours, few days. Oh, but you haven't told me. And a lot of it is lack of communication. So if you want your partner, whoever it is, to take the bin out, can you be specific? Can you take the bin out by 4 o'clock on Wednesday?
Mhm.
Because I can't, I'm gonna be out. Then I think a man can be more responsible. If I say, can you defrost the fridge? He might think it's next summer. So he won't do it, but you are thinking this afternoon. So be clear is very important, isn't it? So because it causes so much resentment, then people are less willing to have, oh, he hasn't done it, so now I'm going to leave that he doesn't even notice he haven't done it. And so sometimes we might spend hours and hours cleaning, and the husband comes home and he doesn't even notice. He just goes straight because husband does it incredible and just their mental thing is like they go a compartment. Now I'm home. I'm going to switch off and I'm going to do this other thing. They're like, well, women can't because we're stuck here the whole time. After working 8 hours work, a woman comes home. This is a place of work.
Mhm.
It's working time, so it never ends. When are
Yeah.
you done? There is
Hmm.
always something. Either the kids have made a mess, or the dog has made a mess, or the garden has something there. There is always like a fridge started looking a bit moldy. There is something. So there must be this boundary. And as long as both agree and are clear, there should be okay. So, what is the first thing that we should do when we realize that we have different ways of tackling appointments and labor? What is the first thing to do?
Yeah, I think you touched on it a bit. It's really important is first to just acknowledge that it's actually an issue. Come at it, don't end around, don't passive aggressive, don't do any, that just come directly to the issue. I asked you to take the bins out. I asked you to do it today. It didn't happen. Can we talk about that, right? And I would say to both of you, like hopefully both partners can sit down and agree that this is an issue that's going on. I would say something that I see a lot is when women present the issue to their male partners, they are often met with dismissiveness or defensiveness, which, none of us like to be presented with things that we're not doing well. I think we all have a reaction to that. But what we know to be true is if your partner is telling you something's bothering them, it is in the relationship's best interest to acknowledge that it's a real thing and it's valid. Right. So that's probably the biggest
Mm.
thing is like, can we both acknowledge that something doesn't feel right? Because what we know also from the research is it has to feel fair. So if one person doesn't feel like it's fair, and I was saying this, your fair might not be my fair, but if we can't get on the same page about that, I might think it's fair, but if my spouse is miserable, it doesn't really matter what I think. It's going to have negative impacts in the relationship anyway. So that's a big part. It's first we have to acknowledge that, right? And then we need to really, I always recommend with my couples, look at yourself first. It's very easy to point your finger at the other person, but doing some real reflection on how did you land here, right? What contributed to this is a two-person job to get land in a place where things don't feel right. Did you take on more than you should because you feel guilty about something? Like maybe you're working out of the home and you're a mother and the world told you you're supposed to be around, and so you've taken on more than you can actually do. Maybe you made assumptions about whose job it was to be handling things on the home front and never really questioned yourself because no one ever told you you should. Maybe there's been some poor communication to your point, right? Of we haven't really been clear with each other. Um, but that's a good place to look to just say, we got here somehow. Like we need to know how we got here so we can get out of it and avoid coming back to this place. I think that's a really important thing. And then you need to really assess what's going on. You can't really fix anything until you have a full picture of what it is. And that needs to be a commitment to be done together. I think when it's done together, it goes a lot farther than one person, especially if you're the person who already feels like you're leading the charge to then take on the role of having to figure out what's actually happening is just going to be another job on your list. It's not going to help anybody. And then really like agreeing that you're going to sit down to tackle this. I think those go a long, long way to beginning to really address the issue. It's one of those things that, I don't know if in your work you talk about this, but I always say to my clients, if you don't have an awareness something, it can't change. If it's not like in your head that it's a problem, there's nothing to be done. So that's what I think about with this is first order of business is, okay, we're all aware of the issue. We all acknowledge it's an issue. And now we're going to sit down and really kind of get the whole picture of what's going on so we can make some changes.
Yes. So awareness is important. That doesn't mean whining,
Hmm.
nudging,
Yes.
accusing, insulting,
Hmm.
using labels.
Yeah.
We don't need all that because, of course, if we say to somebody something is all right, they already feel like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So if we then attack them, that's not gonna be. And also, there's something there. If a person, I know it's not in we haven't specified talking about this, but it just escaping my mind. The standards that we hold, so how the job has to be done, could be different.
Hmm.
So, for example, I can say, I'll do the dishes because you asked me. I'm gonna be very nice to you and I'll do the dishes. But when I do the dishes, they're not quite cleaned to the standard of the other person because there are still beads. Maybe I didn't rinse them, or maybe there are things that are left all around. Or some people say, I'll do the dishes, and that's exactly what we do, meaning they wash the dishes only, they leave all the rest, the worktops are dirty, the floor is a mess, there are things everywhere, and they just walk up and they think they don't. So I think clarity on what we expect to see to say that the job is done is useful, because the way we do things could be different.
Yes, absolutely. There's a term, there's a program that I've worked with called Fair Play that has some methods to deal with some of these discrepancies about household labor. And they have a term they called minimum standard of care that comes actually out of the medical profession. But it's a term, and I think it's a legal term related to the medical profession that says, like, okay, what does a reasonable person agree that is the minimum standard of care? And we can apply that to household labor, right? So okay, cleaning the dishes, the minimum standard of care means you also wipe the countertops and you clean up the water on the floor and you also clean the pots and pans. It's not just the dishes, right? You come to that agreement before so that everybody knows this is what it looks like and that it's everybody's on the same page. And something really interesting that I found that might not be totally intuitive around this is a lot of people's minimum standard of care actually goes back to maybe their values. Like the woman who created Fair Play talks a lot about her husband, they had this dispute about taking the trash out, and she would get really upset if it wasn't done at the time that she thought. And she and her husband would go back and forth. And then they finally talked about it, and she said, "Look, I grew up in a place with no money. We always had, with the minute the trash got full, the cockroaches came. It was terrifying. It makes me think of this horrible situation. So I really, for me, I can't, when it starts to overflow, I go back to that place as a little kid." Her husband heard that and he's like, "Oh, you're not just badgering me. This is something meaningful to you. I can work with that, right?" My husband cares a lot about our kids being involved in some athletic. It's not my thing. But once he said to me, "Look, I had these wonderful experiences. These coaches changed my life. I'm not just trying to put them in it because I want to make things more busy. I hope they have this wonderful experience." Then I think, oh, I'm okay with signing them up for things and having to get them to games and wash uniforms because this is meaningful. You're not just trying to make life difficult. And I think that's an important part of the conversation too.
Hmm, that's a great point.
Yeah.
I had a little memory come to me because
Mm.
many years ago in 1994, I was serving a mission for my church, the LDS church, and I happened to be in Athens in Greece. It's a hot place,
Yeah.
and I've never seen such big cockroaches in my whole life. And despite the fact that my companions maybe were not very enthusiastic about cleaning the kitchen, you literally, if you had one crumb of bread on the floor, these cockroaches will just show up because obviously Greece, open windows, very hot. The cockroaches will come, and I had this hammer. I was ready to kill them because they were disgusting. And so there were some cultures when you can do that. When I used to live in Italy, we had a house on top of a mountain near Firenze. It was closer to Pistoia than Firenze. It's only an hour from Firenze, but that's the area people will recognize. And it was a hot place. And if you leave the trash bag outside of a house in a kind of a cardboard, you will see this column of thousands of ants marching, to take all the so we couldn't leave anything. So we got used to just pick up the trash and just put it somewhere safe, which used to be in France. You had to cross the road and open up a really heavy bulk container with all the neighbors, and then there was a competition which neighbor would arrive first, because if you arrive late it would be too full and then you would have to wait a whole week. So all these little things, I always say, is the small things can really destroy your day-to-day peace. If you're used to have a house clean and you can't really go and live with somebody who's like totally scattered the whole day, it's very difficult.
Yes.
And from this come my suggestion: they should never date somebody and then boom, get married or live together, because you don't know what you're jumping in. So live with them for a week, go on holiday and see if they wake up late, leave a mess everywhere, don't pick up your own thing, never make the bed, they go around trashing. That's exactly what you can expect if you live together. And if it's not good for you, think before going to live. Because it will
Yes.
save you very expensive to divorce nowadays.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
task, as you know, they make life very difficult and very resentful because we don't want to talk about it. And let's say a lot of men in the Mediterranean area, I used to have a mama that does all the work in the house. And so they are served. And so when they go to the new place, when they go to live with a wife, if they used to be served and pampered all the time, there is this high risk that they will not take responsibility. And then the wife, modern Gen Z, will say, what do you think you're doing here? Do you think you're on holiday? You
Mhm.
live here. So we
Yes.
share. You're not helping me. We live,
Yes.
we both live here. We're both adults. And some
Mhm.
people don't want to understand this. The husband is not helping the wife. He
Yes.
lives there as well. So,
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think that's so dead on. And that speaks to some of the invisible part of it, right?
mm,
I always think there's this really funny video that was going around for a while where there was a man and a woman, and she was talking about her laundry and she didn't have time for it to get done. And oh God, what was she going to do? And he said, oh, okay, I haven't told you this, but there's this magical thing that happens. You're going to think I'm crazy, but we have a laundry fairy. And she said, what are you talking about? And he said, okay, if you just leave your laundry basket full of dirty clothes, one day you'll just come back and all the clothes are clean and folded. And she said, I'm the laundry fairy. Like, did you just think that that all happened by itself? Because he just had no idea. He had come from a household where his laundry just magically appeared clean in his room when it was done. And so he didn't see all the steps that went into it, right? Which was like, you had to see the bin was full. You had to take it downstairs. You had to separate it. You had to know that you were out of laundry detergent. You had to fold it, had to go back in the room. So I think to your point, right, if you've been served your whole life and don't take responsibility, you don't see all the invisible stuff that happens. Clothes just show up, food just appears, kids just go to doctor's appointments, whatever you need is just there. And I don't think you can appreciate how much energy goes into that, right?
mm,
And oftentimes I think what we see is why this tends to happen in heterosexual couples more is people don't talk about it. Like you're saying, right? You date for a few months, you get together. Even if you haven't, we don't sit down and say, okay, let's really spell this out together. We sort of default into things. And suddenly you wake up one day, and especially I think when kids come into the picture, and you're thinking, like, why am I the only one who's changed diapers? We never talked about this, versus sitting down beforehand and saying, when we have kids, this is what I think I should take on. This is what you should take on. Let's agree to check in about it. I don't think we do that
mm,
very often. I wish that's going to be my toast at weddings from now on is to tell people they need to sit down and plan that stuff out
yeah,
before they're angry at each other down the road.
yeah. Don't you think that it would be a great thing in high school? They teach you a 9, 10-year-old how to be intimate and a lot more down the roads, a lot of
Yes.
details leaving people shocked. They go home and I'm shocked that I don't want to go back to school. It's like in recent news this week. But they're not teaching you that when you go and live with a human being, you have to share the load because you live there. And so you have to pick up after yourself.
Mhm.
And they don't teach communication, budgeting, and how to run the house. And a lot of people, 15, 16, will say, look, if I have a child and I don't have a husband, I can get a free housing from the housing estate from the council. How amazing. But they don't realize the sheer work required to raise this kid, to look after him, to pay for the bills, to organize everything so he's safe and healthy. Because you really cannot leave it 30 seconds. This little thing moving around can cause damage, can even get hurt. And I don't know if you are aware, there was a joke going around for a long while, and this is husband always says, oh, but you don't do anything at home. So he goes back from work. And so one day he goes back home and he can see there are shoes everywhere, clothes on the floor, dirty mess, the laundry is not done, the carpets are a mess, television on, stereo on, food attached to the wall. And the woman, where is she? She's in the bath, listening to music. And then he goes in and said, Darling, haven't you see what happened there? What happened there? And she said, well, you know when you told me I don't do anything the whole day? Today I didn't do it. And this is valid for men and women because there are
Yeah.
women who do not move
Yeah.
a finger, and I know them personally by name. I will not shame them because I think we should be responsible to do something in the house.
Sure.
And it is true that sometimes, I always remember my grandma. She would go around if there was a crumb on the floor, and she was a very ill person, going from one surgery to the other. She would just bend and pick up a crumb and put in because the floor had to be. She was up at 5 every day. By 7, the whole house was spotless. So you
Mhm.
would wake up and think, I have a fairy.
Yes, yes.
I have a
Uh-huh.
fairy. Everything is
Hmm.
sorted. She will go
Hmm.
down there. Oh, there's a window. I have a window in front of me. There are all the little beading parts. They get dirty, and she would just clean it. It's not that she goes when the husband goes, "Oh, my physio, I cleaned the wind." She wouldn't say that, but she's done it. All her
Hmm.
day is gone doing that stuff. And so we are maintaining a house, and if maintain a
Yes.
house, it's gonna last longer.
Hmm.
You're gonna
Yes.
notice things that are ready. So it's a good responsibility, I think.
Yes.
In Japan, from what I read, I've never been in Japan, but they say that the school teachers ask the children, the students, to clean and mop the floors and clean all the uh,
Love
items that they
that.
have before they actually start the lesson.
Oh,
And
love it.
if I remember, I don't know if it was after the Olympics, after some big games, it was a Japanese. They cleaned all the seats from all the stuff that people
Yes.
throw. And I was like, what a lesson.
Yes. Yes. Because it teaches you responsibility. Like you're accountable for this. You can't wait for someone else to do it. If you see the trash, stop and pick it up. If you do that, it's also about the collective good, right? Like if your house has, and listen, we all have busy times. My house does not look perfect all the time. I want to be clear about that. But you know, when I come home from a long day, if I walk into a mess, I don't feel great. If I come home and there's a meal made for me and everything's straightened up, I feel much better. I feel more peaceful and calmer. It impacts our ability to have our jobs. If someone has taken care of childcare, gotten the kids in their summer camps, made sure somebody picks them up from school, that means that I can go to my job okay. That means my partner can go to his job okay. There's ripple effects to all of these things. It's not even just necessarily about a clean house. And for people who want to be able to invest in other areas of their life, those things take up a lot of time. And so you may either not get to invest in those other areas, right? Or you just don't really realize that someone else taking care of all this stuff means you get to go do the things that you need to do, right?
Yeah.
There's also the appreciation level of that needs to be built up too, of acknowledging what people are doing and offering gratitude.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
say if you find it really difficult to say thank you, you can say, "Oh, I love this room today. Look how amazing,
absolutely.
And even to your children when they've done it, well done. This looks amazing today.
Yes.
Because then they think, oh, I'd like to hear this again. So they might be enticed. There is no promise here, okay? They might feel better about repeating the good activity they've done, or tidying up the room from a mess, etc. Same if you have, say, pets, and so pets can make quite a mess. So if you have a pet, you're supposed to look after this pet and not just leave it to your parents to sort out. So that's good. So in theory, this is all easy. So in the practical term, how, after we talked about it, do we agree? How do we organize this stuff? Do you make a calendar, a sheet with piece of, sticky tape? Do you put something on the fridge? How do you organize
Mhm.
yourself?
It's a great question. I think you can do it a couple of different ways. I mean, if you are someone who is a spreadsheet person, that might be your way to do it. You sit it all down, maybe you color code it and do that. If you're a list maker and that works for you, you can do that. There are also some tools that are already out there for you. I mentioned a program called Fair Play that I've done, I've used their in stuff in my work a lot. They're actually cards, and each card is a task. What's nice about that is it's very tactile and concrete, right? Like you separate them out. Each of you are holding a stack of cards. You can really see like where it's imbalanced. And I've had couples put them up on the wall and move them around. They'll have their names, their kids' names, and everybody. Then they glue the task up there. I have other people who make the charts with the lists, or magnets on the fridge. My really creative, crafty people like do the whole, they laminate them and do all that.
Of
But I
course.
do think there's something to seeing it and having it very concrete, not just in your head, but however it makes sense to you to sit down, really go through all the tasks that are required to keep your household running. And I think people will be surprised because there's even down to things like who's filling out the school forms. If you have the tooth fairy in your house, who's putting the money under the pillow? Who is teaching the kids about spiritual life or volunteering or community service? Like those are all things that somebody needs to take on. So getting those all really set out and organized and getting that written down in a place or
Yeah,
somewhere that everybody can see it, I think is really important.
yeah,
Is a
most
first step.
definitely. Who's also talking to the teachers when we have
Yes.
issues.
Yes.
If you have 3 or 4 children and you're picking them all up in different timetables, and then the teacher wants to talk to you, this guy has got problem, it's usually the person that is in the house the whole day, and that's also the emotional toll. So how useful it is to set up things, and I'm sure those who like Pinterest will be so many visual activities
Totally.
that you can do, so you can make it as pretty as you want, but make sure it doesn't become another job.
Yes.
So when it adds, it becomes extremely complicated and nobody does it. Even just having a jar with
Yes.
stones inside or candy, whatever, where each person puts a jar or puts a jar, listen to me, puts something inside to remember they done the job or they haven't done the job. It's
Mm,
just a very simple way. So it doesn't have to be a really complicated thing.
yep.
I actually do not like spreadsheets because it's so tiny to read all these little lines. I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
like pieces of paper with bold writing so I can see what I'm doing. And I pass the room. Oh, don't, I haven't done that. Spreadsheet, when am I going to have a look at that
Yeah.
tiny thing? I had to remember to go to the computer and remember to look at a file. I mean, I have thousands of files. It's never going to happen, is it? So reminders in the calendars and also things that I think are important when you're organizing holidays. Who's going to do what?
Yes. Without question.
Who's going to organize where we're
Hmm.
going, how we're going, the method of transport, are we bringing meals, are we traveling by car, when we're there, are there activities, if you organize whatever you're doing, who's take care of preparing the car for a trip, all this stuff and then left out to the last minute. Oh, you haven't done it? Oh, I thought you would
Yes.
do it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. All the little details that are required to go and do
Yeah,
that, right? Those things don't just happen on their own.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
also, when you get married or remarried, you might have this thing of a Christmas card lift, great written stuff. You
Yes.
have to give a greeting card to everyone, otherwise you'll be very offended. In Britain, you will give a Christmas card to every person at church, at
Mm.
work, in the club, in the classroom. Who's going to write all these cards?
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
job.
Absolutely.
Who's going to put up a Christmas tree? So much stuff. And eventually, the wife or the person stay home gets all to do. And we say, you're never
Yes.
cleaning. Have you seen the list of stuff to do?
Yes. Because just to your point of the Christmas cards, it's not, you have to buy the cards, you have to know how many you need, you have to know all the addresses of the people, you have to have the time to do it, you have to get the postage, you have to, I mean, it's not a
Exactly.
one-time thing. It's a
Yeah.
multi-layered job,
Yeah.
right?
I would take 3 hours
Yes.
every Sunday on the end of November to write cards for about 30 people.
Hmm.
3 hours. Plus
Yep.
go to the post office, and it
Yes.
just takes so much time. So it's so
Yes.
good to think it through and say, actually, shall we dump this activity we've been doing? It takes so much
Yes.
time and it's not worth it.
Yes, I love that you brought that up too, because that's another thing about when you're starting to look at all these tasks, you really get to look and kind of go back and say, do we want to do this? Like, is this really working for us? Do we care that much about it? Did somebody say we're supposed to, and actually neither of us want to do it?
Yeah,
Great, then let it go,
yeah,
and take those things off your list wherever you can. Everybody's busier than they needs to be.
yeah.
We don't,
Christmas.
nobody has enough time to do
Christmas
that.
is the same. If you have
Yes,
5 kids and
yes,
if they're coming over or you go and see
mhm,
them, who's going to prepare the meals? Who's going to do the cleaning and when? Who's
yes.
going to buy the gifts and when and for whom is going to pack them? Because you end up packing for ages. If you have grandchildren,
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
It would
And
be
even
easy.
just buying, birthday gifts for family members and keeping track of the birthdays, those become
Exactly.
huge arguments when, one person is taking all of that on because, gosh, keeping track of a family's
Yeah.
birthdays could just be a
Yeah.
job probably in and of itself for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Do you know one activity that comes to my mind that we could do? And that would be, because I've done this for productivity, but I could work for this. Get the person who stays in the house, whoever that is, husband or wife, doesn't matter, to take note of everything we do in the morning. As we do it, tick, maybe prepare a list and then tick. Until 1 o'clock, then lunch, then tick, write all the activities. And then do that for 2 or 3 days and realize where is your time going. And then get the other person and they do the activity. And then
Yep.
compare the list and say, okay, wow.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. That's actually where a lot of the research comes from. They call them time studies, right? And they do that and they look and see where people are spending their time.
Hmm.
And something else that they've found through those is also it's not just like what you're doing, but it's the kind of tasks you're doing.
Hmm.
So if you're, I don't know, cleaning out the garage, you can decide when you want to do that. You can pick a nice day to do it. You can do it when you have nothing else going on. If it's you're in charge of feeding the kids and getting them to school, you don't get to choose that. That happens every day, whether you had a good night's sleep or not. Those tasks, we call those low control. You don't get much control over when you do them. They take more, they're more burdensome. They weigh on people more heavily. Things like picking when you want to do the garage, mowing the lawn because you like to be outside, those are high control, which means you have much more control over them. So those things also need to be thought about too, right? If you're tracking what you're doing, if you're thinking about how you're going to redistribute, spreading those a little more evenly are really important. The ones that like just have to happen. Everybody needs to eat every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's such an important work what we do in the house because it helps us
Yes.
to have a very welcoming, fresh, nice place where to be. And if a
Yes.
guest shows up, yeah, please take a seat. You're not going, oh my gosh, I have to hide things under the carpet. If a
Yes.
person coming, the bathroom is terrible. Then set up a routine. Maybe they will help you so you feel more
Mhm.
relaxed in your own house. Because it's very, very, very difficult to focus if you have things everywhere that surround you and remind you you need to clear this. It's just
Mhm.
annoying, isn't it? After a while, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't think. I'm feeling very scattered. Maybe it's because it's so untidy, because your brain has eyes. Your
Mhm.
eyes look all the time and give you information, information, information. And if you are the one that does the jobs in the house, you will think, oh, I have all this work to do. And you can't think, you feel guilty because you can't relax. There's all that to do. So,
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So you can't get away from it.
no, yeah, it's
Yeah.
there. And so it's
Mhm.
important, I think, that everyone thinks about what are their rules, what are their standards, their value, when, who is going to do what and when. And
Yes.
then check up after a month, say, are you happier now?
Yes. Absolutely. I think that's really key is, you're committed to doing this, but humans are slow to change. It's going to take a minute to so check in every once in a while. How's it going? What do we need to do? Are you okay? And then keep going from there, I think.
What an amazing beginning to this
Yeah.
new year to
Yeah.
have a fair distribution of the work in the home, including the PA, secretary, doctor, nurse, first aid.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that I had you here. You
Thank you
know,
for having me. It was so
yeah,
lovely to talk with you about this. It's so
yeah.
important.
It's the most important thing is to get on well at home and to have responsibility assigned to everyone. Even toddlers can
Yes.
fold socks.
Agreed.
So I never taught mine because we didn't wear socks. Bare feet all the time. My kids would hate socks and shoes. But yeah. So guys, if you have any questions for this, you want to really talk to Kate. She is a licensed couple therapist, just to remind you. And also sex therapist as well. So you help
Yes,
people with intimacy.
I
And
do.
who knows, all the problems that can come out, if you start talking, then you realize there are other problems, and maybe she has a book that she can give to you. Maybe she has a course. Maybe she has a nice website full of stuff. Maybe she can give you a coaching session. Whatever that is, I think it's worth having a look at the website, and I'll be putting all my links in the usual places so you can look at them and say, right, let's get going and let's get this life that we really want, which is a much more peaceful life instead of being filled with resentment. he'll be kind of more content and proficient and productive, but also more relaxed because people are more equally balanced. So thank you so much again for being
Yes.
here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys, so thank you so much for being here again, and I hope you will want to share this episode with all your friends because that's an important task. Take care, see you all next week. Bye bye.